The year was 1989, and Touchstone Pictures was quietly dominating Hollywood with a secret weapon: grown up Disney movies in disguise. While Mickey Mouse was busy entertaining the kids, Touchstone Pictures was slinging sass, scandal, adventure, and star power with a slate that included everything from ghost comedies to courtroom dramas. But it wasn't just about the popcorn, because behind the scenes, Touchstone was sharpening its business game, fine-tuning its identity as Disney's edgier sibling, and raking in that sweet box office gold. So buckle up, because today we're diving into Touchstone Pictures on the screen and behind the scenes in 1989. I'll make sure to leave links to my other videos in this series covering the creation, growth, and success of Touchstone Pictures between 1984 and 1988 for you guys to check out if you did miss them. But to summarize, in the early 80s, a slumping Disney found a business model it could use to mature as a studio without alienating its core family audience. They created the banner of Touchstone Pictures, and after that, Disney would go on to then confidently push the boundaries with PG-13 and R-rated content while still shielding the main brand. This really did allow them to maintain their family-friendly core while also expanding into adult markets. And this proved to be a very successful compartmentalization tactic. They also implemented strong genre diversification, balancing between quirky teen, adult, and romantic comedies with sentimental dramas, splashes of action, and the occasional thriller, which did give Disney a much broader audience reach. And between 1986 and 1988, they commanded the box office, which was obviously something the top brass wanted to see continue moving into 1989. With the strong box office results coming in, Disney quickly realized that adult-themed content could generate reliable returns. They could also be made quickly and for much less money, which studio exec loved, especially when animated films had a much longer and more expensive production timeline. So Disney, through Touchstone Pictures, would lean heavily into their new filmmaking strategy. That strategy in a nutshell: to work off smaller budgets and to establish and strengthen relationships with major stars on the rise, or just past their rise, or still maybe reeling from some bad press or legal issues, who could still draw adult audiences. This is something that really did pay off for actors such as Bette Midler, Danny DeVito, Richard Dreyfuss, Tom Hanks, Nick Nolte, Robin Williams, and many others who all fell into one of these categories, and they all ended up having multiple successes under Touchstone. Executives would also use Touchstone Pictures to kind of build actor goodwill, then try to leverage those relationships across other Disney labels for future projects, with the more notable examples of this being Robin Williams voicing the genie in Aladdin, a landmark Disney Renaissance film, or maybe Tom Hanks being a central Disney Pixar figure in the Toy Story franchise as Woody. Now, the funding for their films came through limited partnership deals. Silver Screen Partners 2 was their first financing partnership, consisting of an estimated 20,000 investors. This partnership would really allow Disney to allocate plenty of money to the Touchstone banner for production, and the returns were fantastic. By the time 1989 came around, Disney's film production was almost entirely funded by Silver Screen Partners 4, which at about $300 million was more than enough to float the bill for both Disney and Touchstone projects, working well into 1991. As a studio, Touchstone was rolling by 1987. Between 87 and 88, they'd released 19 movies, most of which were all successes. However, at the same time, this was also an interesting little period in Hollywood. Many smaller studios financially were in a state of flux. Embassy Pictures had closed their doors in 1986. The De Laurentiis Group and Lorimar were having business-altering money issues, as well as were Canon and Carolco. No surprise there. So Disney would see an opportunity during this contraction in the industry to actually strengthen their foothold and release even more movies to once again diversify their revenue. Disney would greenlight Hollywood Pictures in February of '89, and the plan was to share funds from the Silver Screen Partners 4 deal to kick off their slate of movies planned for a launch of the summer of 1990, starting with Arachnophobia. Now, we'll get all into Hollywood Pictures and their history in a future series, but as for Touchstone Pictures, this would be a time of transition. Suddenly, the movie-making money had to be split 3 ways. Touchstone wouldn't have the luxury of bumping up a budget here or there to get something through or to get a specific actor, so the pressure was on for their slate of movies in 1989 to deliver that same box office punch executives were accustomed to, but they had much less margin for error this year. Now, for Touchstone's first movie of 1989, we need to go back in time to the Cannes Film Festival in 1985. This is when Touchstone's Jeffrey Katzenberg would solicit a screenplay from French director Francis Weber. Weber had a script already planned for production in France called Les Fugitives. At the time of the festival, production hadn't even started on that French version yet, but Katzenberg greenlit a US remake and Weber would get to work on an English version of the script.
See this? It's a grenade! And I'm pulling the pin, so no funny business!
Released in January and directed by Weber, Touchstone's first release of the year would be Three Fugitives, starring Nick Nolte as a grizzled ex-con and Martin Short as a hopelessly nervous first-time bank robber who, along with a little girl in tow, stumble into a chaotic partnership in what would turn out to be a charming little offbeat crime comedy. Critics, on the other hand, were pretty harsh on this movie, and while I wouldn't consider it groundbreaking by any means, I do think it delivers a fun, charismatic adventure of comedic errors. It would open in the number 2 spot, but then jump up to the number 1 spot on its second weekend, and it would hold in the top 5 for 5 weeks, so it had a decent audience. Nolte has his humorously lumbering moments, despite probably being miscast here. Short, though, is the shining light in this little gem, and he does effectively carry the comedic weight. It gets a little silly at times, but it's still a feel-good just film that audiences would enjoy. Three Fugitives would pull in $40.6 million on a $15 million budget, and it would end up being a crowd-pleasing comedy that was much better than the traditional options found at the cinemas in January.
What are you doing?
I'm speaking with a dead friend of mine.
Well, would you rather talk privately? Because I could wait in the other room.
No, that's not necessary.
Touchstone would get artsy with its next release in March with New York Stories, an anthology film directed by Martin Scorsese, Francis Ford Coppola, and Woody Allen, with each of them presenting a uniquely personal short film set in the heart of New York City, with stars like Nick Nolte, Rosanna Arquette, and Mia Farrow headlining the different casts. Now, in all honesty, I've never seen this film entirely through. I do remember seeing Scorsese short back in a film class, but I haven't seen Coppola or Allen's. I thought Scorsese's short film about a painter who gets a creative block on the eve of a gallery show was fine. Nothing that really grabbed me, though, and I apparently wasn't the only one. This experiment from Touchstone would be a critical and financial flounder. The small audience this type of film would actually attract were actually lukewarm on this one, as were critics. New York Stories' wide release was a letdown, only taking the number 8 spot with a $2.4 million weekend, and it wouldn't get much better by managing to limp out just $10.8 million on a $15 million budget. This was sort of a theme with Touchstone at the time, kind of slipping these art house passion projects into their schedules, and this time around it was a misfire. Now, behind the scenes at this time, Touchstone was still working to diversify their earnings on the home entertainment side. An exclusive rights deal had already been in place with Showtime since back in 1987. At the time of that contract signing, Showtime was the second largest pay television service behind HBO, and a new deal was struck with Disney, which gave Showtime exclusivity on all films through 1996 for both Touchstone and upcoming Hollywood Pictures films. The prior deal in place had been for 50 movies, and industry insiders believed this new deal was worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $500 million. Now, on the cable TV side, Disney had struck a deal with the USA Network for cable television rights to 26 movies from the Touchstone banner, in a deal that experts predicted was somewhere in the neighborhood of the $50 million range. So despite being a little slow out of the gate in theaters to kick off 1989, they were still making some very profitable business moves.
Where's Frank?
Where the hell is Frank?
Maybe he found a woman.
Maybe he got lost.
Trying to rebound in April, Touchstone would release Disorganized Crime, a small heist comedy directed by Jim Koof, where a gang of mismatched criminals played by Corbin Burnson, Lou Diamond Phillips, Fred Gwynn, and Ruben Blades attempt a small-town bank job that naturally spirals hilariously out of control. Now, I still enjoy this movie. I do think it's much better than it was received at the time. I think the main problem for this movie was that it just came out a week after The Dream Team. Different stories, but still a movie that had that same concept. A group of eccentric adults bumbling through a plot together. I do think the cast here, though, is fantastic. They're great together. I think the laughs are frequent, but it never took off. It would open in the 6th spot with just a $2.8 million weekend. Now, sure, I won't say this movie is laugh out loud hilarious, but I do think it does have more than its fair share of comical situations and fun slapstick banter between the group, particularly from Phillips and Blades. Sadly, though, audiences just didn't fill the theaters for this movie, and it would only get a 2-week run to pull in just a meager $5.3 million on a $7.7 million budget, but I have no doubt this one did pretty well on home video. So at this point in the year, Touchstone was entering spring without a sizable hit to be proud of. Three Fugitives was a success, but nothing that would be cause for a Brinks truck having to deliver the profits to the bank. The studio needed a hit. They needed a film that would pop like they had in years past with Roger Rabbit in '88, or movies like 3 Men and a Baby, or Good Morning Vietnam in '87, or even Ruthless People in 1986, and they felt they had that film on their hands. This movie, however, would not come without its production hurdles. Many heavyweight actors were in talks to play the leading role in this film, such as Gibson, Rourke, Hanks, Hoffman. Touchstone Pictures and Disney, they wanted Robin Williams, and they would get Robin Williams. The only problem is Robin Williams did not want to work with original director Jeff Canoe. He refused to work with him. He did a no-show on day one of production, so Touchstone would have to quickly pivot. They brought in Peter Weir to direct, and just like that, the studio's crown jewel of a movie in 1989 was back on schedule.
Language was developed for one endeavor, and that is
To communicate.
No! To woo women.
Premiering in June, Dead Poets Society featured Robin Williams in one of his most iconic roles as an inspiring teacher at a rigid prep school, awakening a love of poetry, rebellion, and self-expression in all of his students. Despite all the issues, getting Williams into this character was certainly worth it, as there is no denying he is the driving force. This movie is well acted, well written, strongly directed, it has a great score and great cinematography, but Williams is that emotional spark plug that just gets this movie going. He's perfect as this unorthodox English teacher who encourages his students to seize the day and to embrace poetry and life and nonconformity. This movie would become a touchstone for the teen drama done with grace and gravitas. It's also that rare case where sentiment and sincerity win without tipping into melodrama, and audiences were all in on this movie. It would get a rollout release, first just on 8 screens, then under 700 screens its second weekend before going wide, but nothing would stop this movie when word of mouth would spread. It would spend 9 weeks in the top 10 and go on to rake in more than $235 million globally on just a $16.4 million budget. It would get 3 Oscar nominations for Best Picture, Director, and Actor, and it would take home a trophy for the screenplay, further cementing the film as just an indelible piece of cinematic history. There's no denying Touchstone was riding high off the success of Dead Poets Society and its wide commercial appeal, but they weren't done with their summer slate of movies. They had one more project up their sleeve, this one a much lighter film in tone, but also another that was saddled with its own production problems. This was actually a script Touchstone had high hopes for. They paid $1 million for it, which at the time was the highest amount they'd ever spent for one. They also had the Fonz Henry Winkler on as the director, with Tom Hanks fresh off the momentum of Big in the lead, but just a couple weeks into production, Hanks and Winkler had a falling out. Production was halted, but Touchstone needed to hit their summer release date, so a new director would be brought in once again to keep things on schedule.
No slobbering, no chewing. You will wear a fleet collar.
Released in late July, Turner and Hooch is a canine buddy comedy directed by Roger Spottiswoode, where Tom Hanks plays a tidy detective forced to team up with a slobbering dog to solve a murder whether he likes it or not, in a movie that Stanley Kubrick once stated was one of his favorites. Now, this movie would land in theaters about 3 months after K-9, Jim Belushi's similarly themed action comedy about a cop who teams up with an ill-disciplined dog in order to solve crimes. It follows all the tropes, and it hinges entirely on the comedic tension between man and mutt, yet it works. I think Hanks's manic, exasperated energy just bounces hilariously off of Hooch's slobbery chaos, and beneath all the silliness is a surprisingly effective murder mystery and a touching story of companionships. Hanks here would also solidify his growing versatility as a leading man in the late 80s. It's silly, it's sentimental, and occasionally suspenseful, just a weird cocktail that still manages to sit well, and audiences would be drawn into this film's charm. It would open in the #1 spot with a $12.2 million weekend, and it would never drop out of the top 10 during its 11-week run to earn a respectable $71.1 million on just a $13 million budget. Touchstone had intended to ride on the buddy dog comedy movie wave that was growing in Hollywood at the time, and this time it was a financial success.
You have been found guilty.
You know I'm innocent. You know it.
No, I want to be with them.
Kate, I love you.
October '89 would breathe the release of An Innocent Man, a tense drama directed by Peter Yates and starring Tom Selleck as a man wrongfully imprisoned who fights to survive behind bars and expose the corrupt cops who put him there. I think An Innocent Man is one of those underrated flicks where Tom Selleck gets to take a rare break from his mustachioed, Hawaiian-shirted persona. Here, he's just a normal working-class guy wrongfully imprisoned after corrupt cops plant drugs in his house, and what follows is a gritty, blue-collar crime prison drama with shades of a revenge thriller complemented by a hard moral center. I think Selleck's great here. He provides a surprisingly commanding performance, transitioning from the victim to vengeful survivor with a convincing grit. The movie is a bit on the nose, but Yates brings solid direction, turning what really would be a straightforward premise into a very highly emotionally engaging ride, to be honest with you. It would open in the #3 spot with a $5.7 million weekend and go on to earn a respectable $20 million to turn itself into a modest hit. It's certainly more grounded than flashy, but I think it's all the more effective for it. It's definitely not talked about much today, but it's a compelling and tightly made crime drama that's certainly worth rediscovering if you haven't seen it, or if you haven't seen it in some time.
Asking a question that any student in the 8th month of anatomy class should be able to answer.
Touchstone would drop another movie later in October with Gross Anatomy, directed by Tom Eberhardt, following Matthew Modine as a young, carefree first-year med student who learns that getting through school and life is going to take a lot more than his boyish charm, especially alongside co-stars like Daphne Zuniga and Christine Laddie. This film just serves up a light blend of medical drama and coming-of-age comedy as Matthew Modine, a brash, first-year med student, tries to juggle life, anatomy lab, and a whole lot of cadaver talk. It's kind of like Dead Poets Society meets Scrubs, but with more formaldehyde. The film definitely captures that reluctant genius tropes and tries to capitalize on it. And while it's not reinventing the stethoscope by any means, it does offer an earnest look at the emotional and physical toll that medical school can take. I think Modine's fine. He brings a likable charisma. Daphne Zuniga, she's good as well. She holds her own as his driven lab partner. Gross Anatomy is just one of those movies that kind of captures late 80s studio filmmaking where heartwarming and clinical somehow work together. It's not high drama, but it does go down easy. Audiences, though, were lukewarm on this one. Sadly, it would open in the number 5 spot with just a $2.8 million weekend, and when all was said and done, earnings would top out at just $11.6 million on an $8.5 million budget, which is, I'm sure, had more than a few executives kind of pondering their own trips to urgent care.
Goddamn little big pair of rascals you got.
Are you talking about my eyes, Governor?
And rounding out the year in December of 1989 would be Blaze, directed by Ron Shelton, starring Paul Newman as Louisiana Governor Earl Long, and a steamy, political-tinged romance with Lolita Davidovich as the provocative burlesque dancer who challenges both his heart and his public image. To me, Blaze is one of those movies that kind of struts into the room with its nice suit, a cigar, a wink, and a scandal under its arm. This sultry political biopic tells the mostly true story of a Louisiana governor played with roguish charm by Paul Newman, who falls head over heels in love for Blaze Starr, a fiery burlesque dancer played by Lolita Davidovich in her breakout role. Now, the film walks a tightrope between Southern fried drama and romantic comedy, never quite sure if it wants to seduce the audience or filibuster them, which did result in a lukewarm opening. Blaze would take the number 9 spot with a $1.7 million weekend, and it would only manage to pull in $19 million on a $22 million budget. Critics were a bit off on this one. Audiences didn't really know what to do with it. So despite the genuine chemistry between Newman and Davidovich, Blaze would not turn into that end of the year awards bait contender that Touchstone execs were expecting. But regardless, I think Blaze stands out as a late career curveball for Newman. Equal parts striptease, satire, and Southern charm, all wrapped in a haze of tobacco smoke and political sass. So closing out the year and ending the 80s, Touchstone Pictures had successfully cemented itself as a bona fide heavyweight player in Hollywood. This little studio certainly had big studio backing, but all the creativity in these films released by Touchstone Pictures during the 80s would just change the landscape of the mid-level film that could just thrive on great performances and creative ideas for cinematic storytelling. They found a formula for success, and they would only lean more into it as the decade would turn. Because Touchstone would only continue their box office domination in the 90s, releasing over 100 films that for the most part are still remembered to this day. I hope you guys have all enjoyed this look back at the rise of Touchstone Pictures during the 80s. We'll continue this journey into the 90s in a future series, but that's it for Touchstone for now. What are some of your favorite movies from Touchstone Pictures during the 80s? Let me know down in the comments. Thank you guys, as always, so much for watching my videos and this series. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope to see you guys at the next one coming real soon. And until then, movies never say die.
This is Jack Burton in the Pork Chop Express, and I'm talking to whoever's listening out there.
Survive a war, you gotta become war.
I suppose we have to register you as a lethal weapon.
You trying to say Jesus Christ can't hit a curveball?